Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show. Glad to have you here. Now, I want to talk about something this afternoon. It's very important. Uh, I found an article, and it summed it up. Sometimes, uh, to explain what I see coming, it's a little bit hard to describe it exactly. This article is really good. It summed it up quite well, but I want to use this article, and also I want to add a little bit more to it. So let's get started. Let's open up the charts right here and take a look at this article um, and see what it has to say. It says, so what happens if there's a recession? Debt might not be the immediate cause of the downturn, but it might add fuel to the fire to make the recession worse. So it's exactly right. Debt might not be the immediate cause. What'll be the cause is external issues like the trade war, the Brexit, a sharp downturn in the Chinese economy. Hong Kong could prove to be a problem as well, but we'll have to wait and see on Hong Kong, see what happens. Hong Kong is a hub for trade for China, and the situation there is very important to this situation. So anyway, let's move on with the article. It says it might add fuel to the fire and make the recession worse. Say, for instance, that the protectionism, which is the trade wars and stuff, shaves enough points off of global U.S. GDP, or gross domestic product, to create a sharp recession. Corporate and some government default risk could spike. A run on credit would follow, which could spark a liquidity crisis where nobody wants to buy anything, and the credit house of cards that low rates has built would come tumbling down. In other words, the credit bubble would burst. And I couldn't agree more. I think that's what's going to happen, to tell you the truth. Now, this is where it gets interesting, and this is the part I like about this article. It says, yet it seems unlikely that policymakers would just stand by and watch. That's an understatement, a complete understatement, that it's unlikely that they would stand by and watch. They're not going to stand by and watch the entire economy melt. They didn't in 2008, and they will not do that now. Okay, now, but what's going to happen first? A run on credit, liquidity crisis. The entire system starts to melt down toward deflation. That's what happens first. So basically what we're looking at here is a 180-degree spin. So first we're facing this way. It's almost like these off-ramps on the freeway, where you have to go around a full circle. So you come off the off-ramp and your car has to go around a full circle to go back around where you were again, This is like 100. That's a 360-degree spin. What I'm talking about here is a 180-degree spin. In other words, a complete about face in the economy. First, bubbles will be bursting, runs on credit. Nobody has any money. Nobody wants to buy anything. They're all running into the dollar. They're running into U.S. Treasury bonds, etc. Okay? The house of cards, the credit house of cards, the bubble is bursting. These enormous bubbles that have been created with 0% interest rate for so many years start to burst. The whole thing starts to come down and disintegrate. And what does he say here? Yet it seems unlikely policymakers would just stand by and watch. And they're not going to. So what we're going to get is that turn, or that 180-degree flip. And this is what's going to catch all these people that are running into the dollar for safety, is that 180-degree flip. That change in policy can happen so fast. It can happen like as quick as I can snap my fingers. Okay, so we move on with the article. It says, while central banks have been unable to kickstart their respective economies with accommodative monetary policy, they have shown a willingness to do something, do anything, to prevent another great recession. And this is so very true. they're not going to sit around and watch everything disintegrate. They're going to come in. Now, I've heard a lot of talk by other people who say the Fed has no tools left. Well, listen to what it says in this article. He says, they have shown a willingness to do something, anything, to prevent another Great Recession, and still they do have tools at their disposal. They still have tools at their disposal. And, I couldn't agree more. Back in 2008, we never could foresee what the Fed, the extent that the Fed will go through to try to pull the economy out. When the troubles really hit hard and hit home, when everything is turning over, they panic and they come up with some very inventive ways of injecting money into the system, or liquidity. Modern monetary theory insists that they can fly by their bootstraps. In the old days, boots used to have a little strap on them, and it would seem logical that you could grab those bootstraps and pull hard enough, you should be able to fly. Should be able to lift yourself up by your own bootstraps and fly, But, if a man can lift 200 pounds and he only weighs 150 pounds and he grabs those bootstraps and he pulls 200 pounds on him, he should lift off the ground, right? It seems logical. That's the way modern monetary theory works. If you print up a whole bunch of money and you give it to everybody out there and you create the wealth effect, well, they should be all rich, and the economy should spring into action because everybody's got money to spend and so on. This is modern. You don't have to work for money anymore. Oh, that's old-fashioned. Just have the government send you a big check, and the government just keeps printing more and more. That's modern monetary theory. And quite seriously, as silly as it sounds to you guys, and as silly as it sounds to me, they actually believe in this. These highly educated, they go through both, they start school when they're 5 years old and they don't quit until they're 40. But they believe this is true. They believe that they can quite literally print money and send checks out to everybody, and that'll make everybody rich and the economy will improve. It doesn't work that way. It says they'll do anything to prevent another recession, and they still have tools at their disposal. They are going to invent the most amazing tools you guys ever seen in your life with helicopter money. Ben Bernanke has already told everyone what they're going to do. That's why he got the name Helicopter Ben. He said that if we have to, we will fill a helicopter full of money and fly over and just dump it out on the ground. Everybody can have it. Yes, but what's that going to do to the value of the currency? Well, Donald Trump said, he said already, we want to weaken the dollar, we want a weaker dollar. Well, that's a good way of doing it, but I can think of other ways that they can do it, that they don't have to rent a fleet of helicopters. Of course, you never know. When it comes to these central bankers, you never know. They might actually do that. But, wouldn't it just be easier just to, they got your social insurance number or social security number. Wouldn't it just be easy? They can look back and they can see how much taxes you paid all through your life, just to write you off a check for your taxes that you've paid. Send them back. Or something like that. Or a credit scheme where they issue everyone in America, including kids, a credit card with maybe a $50,000 credit limit on it and 0% interest rate to pay on that credit card. Boy, wouldn't Americans have a splurge then, eh? And brand new $50,000 government credit cards. Visa credit cards. $50,000 limit. Or $25,000 limit or whatever, like the highest platinum card or whatever, with zero interest to pay on the money you take out. Stuff like that. They can invent new stuff that we've never heard of before. Well, we have heard about guaranteed income, but a little snag for them there. with the guaranteed income. They can't make it higher than the minimum wage that people are out working, like at McDonald's and stuff. If they give the guaranteed income to all people, they have to be a little bit careful that people just don't quit work. Oh, I got the guaranteed income now. I don't need to work anymore. People just walk off their jobs, drop their chef's hat or whatever, and head home and collect the guaranteed income. They got to be a little bit careful. They can have a guaranteed income, but they got to keep it maybe a 1/3 lower than what you're going to get on minimum wage. And the second part is it would probably be a good idea for them to add that guaranteed income to everybody that's already employed. In other words, if you stay employed and say you're making so much a month, whatever your amount you're making employed, then you'll get the guaranteed income as well on top of what you're already making, And this would be an incentive for people to stay working, whereas a person who's just on the guaranteed income, he'd probably only get about 2/3 the salary he would make working at McDonald's, So this is what's going on. But they can invent new methods that we never thought of before, and they're going to. They have to. They got no choice now at this point in time. They have to invent new methods of getting the money out there, because this economy is going to start melting down, and they need these new tools at their disposal. So let's read on. If they see the prospects of a liquidity crunch, don't be surprised if the Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank start acting an awful lot like the Bank of Japan. And that might point to the most likely denouncement to the next recession, a period of mild expansion or even stagnation punctuated by intermittent downturns into the red, which central banks will counter even more creatively and with their support. He says it can't work forever, but as Japan proves, it can work for a very long time. Actually, that's wrong. The Japanese situation was different than ours. For one thing, Japan went into their problems as an extremely productive country, I should say. Extremely, almost like a company. The whole country's like a company. They got these big auto manufacturers like Toyota, Honda, Nissan, so on. They've got an awful lot of industry in Japan for such a small country. They're a powerhouse. And also they had an awful lot of savings, an awful lot of privately held savings and stuff. And so an awful lot of the debt was carried privately, and Japan had enough liquidity going into the crunch, stored away liquidity from all those years selling Toyotas to us over here, and selling Hondas and whatever. They had so much capital, basically, that they were able to carry them through. And at the same time, Japan went through an awful period of 10 years. They had a lost decade, But the thing about it is we're in a totally different situation. We haven't got a very progressive, very powerful, like Japan had, a very progressive, very powerful industrial sector where factories and everything else producing goods and stuff. America is not like that. America ship most of their factories and stuff overseas. We've become a consumer nation, and it's a totally different situation than Japan had. So the result's going to be totally different when we go into the exact same situation that Japan had. And so I don't believe that it's going to last. He says, as Japan proved, it can work for a very long time. No, it's not going to work for a very long time, but it is going to work for a period of time. It is going to work. But we're going to go into this recession, and this is where it's going to get interesting. Let me turn the charts off right here, and I'm going to talk about where it's going to get interesting and where 2 years comes in and how that 2 years is going to come into play. What's going to happen is we're going to head into this recession. And the Federal Reserve and the central banks, all the central banks, are going to work in a coordinated effort to try to stem it off. But they're going to have to be very inventive this time, because their initial offerings, like a new round of quantitative easing or lowering interest rates and stuff like that, ain't going to cut it. We're still going to keep going into the recession, and it's going to get worse. That's when they're going to have to get inventive. That's when they're going to have to start doing helicopter money. What's going to be the effect of helicopter money? That's the big question. I'm going to answer it right now. Inflation. But not hyperinflation. Inflation. Inflation like we had in the 1970s. But we had Paul Volcker in the 1970s. He's raised interest rates up like to 20%. We can't do that now. We have to service the debt. This enormous trillions and trillions of dollars worth of debt we have to service. So we can't raise interest rates to 20% to stem off inflation. We're not going to be able to stem off the inflation. We're just going to have to keep monetizing, and monetizing heavier and heavier. So this is where the 2 years comes in. For a 2-year period, we're going to see this inflation really bad, like in the 70s, and it's going to slowly increase over a period of 2 years. After 2 years is over of this profoundly bad inflation, stagflation is what it's going to be. At the end of around, I might be a little bit off. It might only last a year, or it might last 3 years. But 2 years seems about right to me, After that 2-year period is over, what's going to happen is the confidence in the fiat currencies are going to be eroded to a certain point where we're going to start to slide into hyperinflation. That's when the hyperinflation is going to begin. And, all during that 2-year period, they're going to claim that we have a recovery, just like they did after 2008. They're going to say, hey, we got a recovery. And it is going to be a little bit better than the recession that we had. But the recovery is going to be another fake recovery for 2 years. But then we're going to start to slide into the hyperinflation. And when we do, you're going to see a little pickup, because the velocity of money is going to start to explode. That's when we're going into the hyperinflation. So we got about 2 years left, guys, before we actually have hyperinflation. But we don't have 2 years before we have this profoundly bad inflation. Now, I'm talking about inflation. The Fed says that we have less than 2%, which is not really true. It's actually a lot higher. That 2% is going to jump to 10% by their official score. But it's actually going to be a lot higher than 10%. The real inflation numbers is probably going to be 20% or more. For that 2-year period. And toward the end of that 2-year period, it's probably going to jump even higher, 40, 50%. It's going to be inflation, runaway inflation is what it's going to be, that leads in, after 2-year period, leads into hyperinflation. And the hyperinflation is going to be the situation that they cannot control. The Federal Reserve and all of their tricks only add fuel to the hyperinflation. It's kind of like there's different kinds of fires out there, I'm going to tell you this as a public service announcement to you ladies out there. If you ever get a hot oil fire on your stove, don't try to douse it out with a cup of water, because it'll practically explode in your face. You got to have a special fire extinguisher in the kitchen that will put grease fires out, and they have special ingredients inside them, because very dangerous in the kitchen to get a grease fire, like if you're cooking up fries or something like that and you got a big pan full of grease. More people have had terrible, so you got to be careful this, and I would recommend everybody in my audience out there to go in and get a little fire extinguisher that you can screw into the wall near someplace convenient in your kitchen, just in case you get a grease fire. Just a recommendation. Okay, listen, thank you guys for listening to this show. And we will catch you very, very soon. Bye-bye, and give me a thumbs up. Bye-bye, guys.